morning, everyone. Welcome to this year's Competition Policy Conference hosted by Chatham House, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Jenny Story. I'm a partner in the antitrust practice at Clifford Chance, and I have the pleasure today of introducing our keynote speaker, Sarah Cardell, who is Chief Executive of our very own Competition and Markets Authority. Just for everyone, so everyone remembers, this session is on the record. So Sarah really needs no introduction, I think, to many people in the room, but I will go ahead with that nonetheless. So Sarah was appointed Chief Executive of the CMA in December 2022, and she's a member of the CMA's board and leads the CMA's senior executive team. Sarah was previously the CMA's General Counsel with responsibility for leading the CMA's legal service and policy and international directorates, as well as the CMA's digital markets unit, so quite a broad portfolio. Sarah joined the CMA from Ofgem, where she was legal partner for the markets division, leading on competition matters. And prior to joining the regulators, Sarah was in private practice in London, advising on a wide range of EU and UK merger and antitrust matters. So we're very lucky today that Sarah has agreed to do an extended keynote for us. Recent and soon to be implemented policy and legislative changes in the UK make this a fascinating time to be a lawyer, at least, but perhaps a less certain time to be doing business here. And I know from discussions with my colleagues and my own clients that they are very eager to hear from you today. So with that, I will at least sit aside and give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for the introduction, and very happy to be speaking here today. Driving growth, how the CMA is rising to the challenge. Now, much has changed since July, when I was first invited to speak at this conference. In the UK, our new government has set out an ambitious programme of reform underpinned by a national growth mission and supported by a modern industrial strategy. In the EU, we've seen the Draghi report on EU competitiveness and the appointment of a new competition commissioner. And in the US, the election of a new president. Much change, and undoubtedly more to come, but also some valuable clarity. Growth is the new government's top priority, and competition is core to growth. That's why we made driving productive and sustainable growth a key pillar of the CMA strategy back in 2023. But without business, there is no competition. That's why it's important for the CMA to work with, listen to, and act on feedback from a wide range of businesses. As we focus on the critical part that the CMA can play in the success of the growth mission, we must evolve. But we must stay true to our mandate from Parliament to promote competition within and outside of the UK for the benefit of consumers. We know that the benefits from promoting competition are profound and far-reaching, not just lower prices, but more innovation, choice, quality, security of supply, productivity, investment and growth. Since Marcus and I became chair and chief executive, we've pushed hard to make rapid and meaningful progress, delivering change whilst maintaining stability. An almost entirely new executive team with competition, consumer and corporate expertise. New non-executive directors with deep backgrounds in business, innovation and investment. Overhauling our strategy and prioritisation processes to maximise the impact of our work. Greater stakeholder engagement and transparency than ever before. A surge in our digital and technology capability, and a new strategic business and financial analysis team to ground our work in commercial realities. Some of our actions over the last 18 months, which promised to have the greatest impact for stakeholders, like the Phase 2 merger reforms, are just now coming into effect. And some of our most significant opportunities to unlock competition as a force for growth, particularly in the vital UK tech sector, will begin next year with the new Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. We've made a strong start. We can and will do more. At a critical moment for the UK's economic growth and prosperity, we must deliver a regime that is swift yet rigorous, robust but pragmatic, agile yet predictable, and collaborative yet independent. We must unashamedly focus on the best outcomes for UK consumers, UK businesses, and the UK economy, and always be open and transparent. We must deliver a regime that leaves no one in any doubt that the UK is open to business, whilst remaining true to our statutory duty and Parliament's intent to help realise for the UK all the benefits that flow from effective competition. Can the CMA rise to that challenge? Absolutely. I'll cover 3 main points today. First, that competition is an engine for growth and an essential lever in industrial strategy, but that in pursuing growth, competition can be balanced alongside other policy objectives. Next, how competition supports investment and our response to concerns about the impact of the competition regime on investment. And finally, how the CMA continues to progress and evolve whilst remaining true to our mandate. My starting point is that competition is an engine for growth, an essential lever in industrial strategy. It should be uncontroversial to say that the spirit of competitive rivalry can be harnessed to drive the innovation, productivity, investment, and ultimately the growth on which a more secure and prosperous future depends. And consumer protection gives people confidence to spend, spurring growth across our economy. Evidence and history show us that where competition is stronger, innovation, productivity, and wage growth will be higher too. And this also benefits investors. They must be confident that the startups and the scale-ups they back here in the UK have a fair chance of success on a level playing field, and that they can get a return on their investment, whether that's from growth or from exit. Equally, in an increasingly uncertain and volatile world, competition is ever more important to shore up resilience and self-reliance in our economy. Logically then, just as skills, trade, tax or energy policy are key levers for sectoral growth, so too is competition policy. So we welcome the government's commitment in its Industrial Strategy Green Paper to robust and independent enforcement of competition and consumer protection law. As we set out in our response to the Green Paper, which we're publishing today, an industrial strategy which creates and captures maximum long-term value for the UK must be one in which competition is a core component. This is important to emphasise because there's sometimes a perception, wrong in my view, that competition policy and industrial strategy are in tension. Perhaps that's because industrial strategy is sometimes used as shorthand for national champions. The Green Paper itself lays out a far richer vision for modern industrial strategy than that. And a strategy of building UK champions strong enough to compete in global markets is not, in any case, anti-competitive, provided this strength does not result in harm to UK consumers from weak competition at home. Putting competition at the core of industrial strategy can support the government's objectives in 2 ways. First, effective competition drives growth directly in key sectors, removing barriers which stifle the flow of capital, innovation, and the scaling of businesses. Second, when government itself acts to intervene in markets, the insertion of pro-competitive principles can maximise the long-term impact of those interventions across the economy, whilst minimising the risk of unintended consequences. Fundamental to growth is public sector productivity. Public procurement represents around 1/3 of public expenditure. Now, evidence from around the world suggests it's highly vulnerable to anti-competitive behaviour. We provide advice to government and public authorities across the UK on the design of competitive processes to support procurement. And we take direct enforcement action. Last year alone, the CMA issued fines totalling almost £60 billion to firms involved in rigging both public and private sector bids. Alongside this, we're using our extensive AI and data science capability to assist public sector organisations both nationally and regionally to identify anomalies in bidding data and indicators of potential illegal conduct. This has the potential to deliver substantial taxpayer savings, but also greater public sector productivity. I'd now like to reflect on how, in pursuing growth, competition can be balanced with other policy objectives. That's true for industrial strategy, as it is for all government policy. The CMA has a statutory function to advise government on the competition impacts of its policy design, but it's for government to weigh this alongside other objectives. And even within the competition regime, the statutory framework gives the CMA several levers to take account of wider factors. The Competition Act prohibits anti-competitive agreements, but it still allows cooperation to drive innovation or other economic benefits in certain circumstances. For example, our Green Agreements guidance helps businesses understand how they can lawfully collaborate to achieve environmental sustainability goals. And flexibility also exists in the merger regime. There, the statutory question is whether a merger is likely to lessen competition. But as part of our assessment, we can evaluate whether the merger is likely to result in competition-enhancing efficiencies that might offset immediate concerns. For example, efficiencies flowing from long-term infrastructure or technology investments. And we can consider whether remedies are available that lock in those efficiencies or preserve relevant customer benefits, including benefits that flow from innovation. A case in point is the proposed Vodafone 3 merger, specifically the provisional remedies decision of the Independent Inquiry Group. Now, I must issue a health warning here. Highlighting the breadth of possible considerations within the legal framework is not an invitation for advocacy on merger cases based on spurious and insufficiently evidenced efficiencies. The evidential bar is high, and that's for good reason. Firms spending time and money on legal and economic advisor fees in this way might be well advised to channel their investments elsewhere. What we would welcome, though, in the context of our regular stakeholder engagement, is feedback on how these aspects of the regime are working in practice. Additionally, while the CMA takes our decisions independently based on a competition test, the system recognises the need for government to intervene in certain limited circumstances, where government, not the CMA, is better placed to balance the wider public interest considerations. This system works well because it's transparent, it's predictable, and it's set out in statute. And finally, the government's strategic steer provides a really important bridge between government policy and an independent competition authority. Turning now to the relationship between competition and investment. The Industrial Strategy Green Paper asks about the interaction between investment and competition, and rightly so, because we know that investment is a persistent source of UK underperformance compared to international peers. Now, logically, competition drives investment, because a dynamic economy which rewards innovation and productivity is a magnet for entrepreneurs, with a keen eye for opportunities to found and grow businesses, and for their investors, which back them. The CMA's Microeconomics Unit will be publishing work in early 2025 that will bring even greater clarity to this relationship between competition and investment. But we know that barriers to effective competition, anti-competitive practices, high barriers to entry, those barriers can deter investment. We also know that competition alone is not always sufficient to drive investment. A number of other barriers to investment also exist. Factors like access to capital or skills, quality infrastructure, and well-designed regulation are also important. How and when investment flows through our economy also matters, particularly how it translates into value for money and long-term benefits that are felt by people across the country. Investment may flow despite weak competition, but investment into competitive markets drives more equitable and longer-lasting benefits. And what of the concern that the competition regime itself may deter investment? We know from investors that stability, independence, analytical and evidential rigour and transparency for UK institutions are a powerful attraction. These are all hallmarks of the UK competition regime. But we take seriously any concerns that the way in which the regime is applied could chill investment. Now, our engagement to date with stakeholders often reveals that these concerns are more based in perception than reality. Even so, we know that perceptions matter, and we must act to address this. In my discussions with stakeholders, I've heard four major concerns, often in relation to merger control: proportionality, predictability, process, and pace. Proportionality matters to investor confidence, and it's sometimes said that the CMA is overly interventionist compared to other authorities. Some numbers might be helpful here. Over 50,000 M&A deals are announced annually. Last year, the CMA conducted just 54 phase 1 investigations. Of the 9 we took to phase 2, 5 were cleared unconditionally, and a further 2 with remedies. Only 1 was subject to a prohibition decision at the end of phase 2. And the number of digital mergers subject to remedies, prohibition, or abandonment shows that to have been no more likely to face intervention than any other type of case. But proportionality is always front of mind in our approach. That's why we recently raised our de minimis thresholds from 15 to 30 million pounds, helping us concentrate our efforts on the mergers that truly require our attention. But for those businesses who do come into the system, we want to make sure that the experience is not just proportionate in outcome, but also proportionate in approach. And that brings me on to the other points that I'd like to address. Predictability. For every merger control jurisdiction globally, there's some uncertainty of outcome. That's inevitable as a feature of an independent, evidence-based review process. But for the UK, that's overlaid with concerns about whether the CMA will investigate at all, in other words, our jurisdiction. Now, the UK merger regime, unlike many other countries, operates a voluntary regime. Companies can choose whether to file, and the CMA may call in unnotified deals if they meet the legal tests. This introduces a degree of jurisdictional uncertainty, though extensive guidance and case precedent is available to help. It's also worth noting that there are real benefits to that voluntary regime in terms of reducing burden on business. We typically investigate far fewer cases annually than economies of a similar size. Phase 1 investigations in the UK last year, 54. In France, 266 investigations were opened. In Germany, 800, as well as investigations by the European Commission. But through our regular stakeholder engagement, we will redouble our efforts to provide greater clarity on jurisdiction where we can, and we welcome more feedback on this. Process. We know businesses need confidence in the CMA's processes. How transparent, how streamlined, how open, how consistent we are in the way that we operate. What does it feel like to go through a CMA merger review? How does this compare to other jurisdictions? We want to make sure that every business coming out of a UK merger review feels that they have been treated fairly and consistently, regardless of the final outcome. Now, the major overhaul of our phase 2 investigation process, which is just now beginning to be implemented, marks a significant milestone on the path to a best-in-class experience that we want to offer stakeholders. That will deliver a more transparent, more collaborative, and less adversarial approach, with better opportunities for constructive engagement between the independent CMA panel and the parties. Transparency is also a two-way street. The merger regime must not live in an ivory tower, but neither should companies believe that the way to success is through backroom lobbying. And finally, pace is crucial. Businesses tell us that the protracted uncertainty of a lengthy investigation can be tough, especially for startups and smaller companies, and we understand this. We will be relentless in our pursuit of the quickest possible outcomes to minimize uncertainty for business whilst protecting the rigor of the system. And that includes not just hitting our statutory deadlines, but also tailoring our approach to the issues at hand and moving quickly to discuss remedies in appropriate cases. Now, finally, I'd like to talk about how the CMA will continue to progress and evolve whilst remaining true to our mandate. I said at the start that we could do even more to deliver a regime that supports the growth mission. As we plan our portfolio of work for the next year, we will have a laser focus on growth. And we will also continue to progress and evolve in the way that we work. So let me close with 3 specific examples. First, the new digital markets competition regime. Second, our approach to mergers, and in particular merger remedies. And finally, our external engagement and our reporting. Now, a landmark new digital markets competition regime comes into the force at the beginning of next year. And I want to emphasize quite what a step change this represents in our ability to drive competition and create opportunities for growth across the UK tech sector. Opportunities to harness the benefits of continued investment and innovation by the very largest firms, but at the same time, opportunities to create a level playing field for startups and scale-ups, many of whom are UK-based, to succeed, enabling them to access key inputs, key infrastructure and ecosystems on fair and reasonable terms, and maximising their opportunity to bring forward innovative challenge to existing products and services. And opportunities for UK businesses across the whole economy who rely on core platform services and for whom greater choice, more innovation and lower prices will fuel much needed productivity gains diffused across the whole economy. This is a unique moment to deliver a new regime that is targeted on driving benefits for the UK economy, but also to do so in a way that's bespoke, proportionate and participative, addressing many of the areas of feedback that I've just discussed. At the heart of the new regime is proportionality. It's been carefully designed to apply only to the very largest companies and to individual designated activities within that. And the new regime is bespoke and tailored to fast-moving digital markets with interventions developed through a forward-looking participative approach, providing the predictability that's critical in these important dynamic sectors. The process for designing any intervention will be collaborative and transparent, with the aim of keeping innovation-led markets open and bringing firms on the journey with us. And we're committed to moving at pace, taking a solutions-first approach wherever possible, whilst respecting due process. Now, under the DMCCA, the CMA will be subject to a new duty of expedition, which means that we will focus more sharply on pace across all of our work. And we're also keen to see what we can learn from operating this new regime that we can bring back across the rest of our work. Returning to mergers. As I said earlier, we want to make sure that every business coming out of a UK merger review feels that they have been treated fairly and consistently, regardless of the outcome. And we know that two of the key areas of feedback are around pace and proportionality. A critical element to delivering both of those is how the mergers remedies regime operates. Now, we've already started to address this through the phase 2 reforms, but as those reforms bed in, the logical next step is a more focused review of our approach to remedies specifically. The goal for merger control is simple, and it's always been the case. Every deal that is capable of being cleared either unconditionally or with effective remedies should be. Only a truly problematic merger where the harm to businesses and consumers cannot be effectively addressed through remedies should not proceed. Today I'm announcing the launch in the new year of a review of our approach to merger remedies. Now, amongst other issues, it will cover first, when behavioural remedies may be appropriate, including, importantly, any distinction for regulated sectors. Second, the scope for remedies that lock in genuine rivalry-enhancing efficiencies, and also the role for remedies to preserve relevant customer benefits, which may offset anti-competitive effects. And finally, building on the phase 2 reforms, we'll also consider how we move to effective remedy discussions as quickly as possible, informed both by a clear understanding of our potential competition concerns, but also a sound appreciation of the commercial reality of the parties' business operations. As with the phase 2 reforms process, I hope this review can be conducted in the spirit of collaborative endeavour to deliver a best-in-class mergers regime. The CMA will approach it with an open mind and a readiness to listen, making sure that the regime works as well as it can whilst protecting UK businesses and UK consumers from the harms of an anti-competitive merger. In that same spirit of collaboration, we'll further enhance our engagement with the business, investment and startup communities. Now, in the last year, we've engaged with a greater range of stakeholders than ever before, from the largest global businesses to challengers, new entrants and entrepreneurs, from consumer groups and civil society to diverse industry bodies, the CBI, FSB, Tech UK, Startup Coalition, Founders Forum and Scale Up Institute, to name just a few. But we're particularly keen to hear more from the investment community and from the UK's vibrant startup community. So I'm pleased to announce the launch of a new CMA outreach series for investors and startups with a particular focus on mergers. I hope that this will help us continue to learn from these communities whilst further strengthening their understanding of and confidence in the CMA and our work. The stakeholder engagement that we've already done has provided valuable insight into the work that we do and how we can improve. We're now embedding this across the CMA. Going forward, we'll use our regular engagement with a wide range of stakeholders to seek clear feedback on how we are working and report on that on an annual basis. This will enable us to play back in a more consistent and transparent way the feedback that we've received and how we've acted on it. And finally, we'll include in our annual report and accounts a review of the impact of our work on economic growth, and we'll seek feedback on the best way to approach this. I'll finish where I began: stability and change. As an independent competition and consumer protection authority, we are set up to provide long-term stability, but we're also on a continuous path to delivering greater value for the UK. We will continue to ensure that the power of competition drives the growth and prosperity that we all want to see, and we will continue to evolve in the way that we work, to support growth, to build stakeholder confidence, to deliver outcomes at pace, and to bring even greater clarity and transparency around our decisions and our processes. We will further strengthen our engagement with businesses whose success is critical to a more prosperous future for the UK. And in doing this, through all of our work, we will remain true to our statutory purpose to promote competition in the interests of UK businesses and UK consumers. Thank you very much.
Join me. Thank you very much, Sarah. There is so much to pick up on. So I'm just going to pick a couple of questions because I know there is going to be a lot of questions in the floor. So picking up on what you've said about merger control, I think in particular, I think practitioners and businesses will recognise that actually there are relatively low levels of intervention in the UK. But for those businesses that are on the pointy end of an investigation, I think what you've said about this perception of proportionality and pace, that is a real concern. So I think there will be lots of businesses in the room who feel quite encouraged by what you've said. But how are you sort of seeing this, I guess, a policy shift? How are you going to see that play out in practice, and what will companies see being done differently by case teams?
Yeah. Look, I think you'll see it playing through in a number of different ways, and a lot of that will come as we implement the phase 2 reforms, because obviously what we did earlier in the year was really set out that ambition and set out some of the sort of structural procedural ways in which we would change the overall framework. But this is really the moment now to put that into practice. So as examples, having that really early engagement directly with the businesses, and I speak as a former legal advisor myself, but I think I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to speak directly to businesses, for businesses to understand the issues that we're looking at, why we're looking at those issues, why sometimes we need to sort of get to the bottom of pieces of analysis or pieces of information, but really at no point to be in any doubt, what is the question that we're asking? Why are we asking that question? What is the sort of end point that we're getting to? I think some of what I've sort of seen firsthand over the years is that it can sometimes take too long, I think, for there to be a real appreciation on both sides for parties and their advisors to have a really clear sense of what's the issue, and to make sure that we at the CMA really understand the business, we understand the market. We do a lot of work, but we want to make sure that those two things connect as quickly as possible, because that enables us to get to a point of being able to identify as rapidly as we can, is there a solution here? And if there is, let's find that solution and make that work. And I think particularly for smaller businesses who find themselves caught up in a merger review, and I've had a lot of engagement over the last year, and I've really heard and listened to the feedback that, of course, this creates huge uncertainty, and that uncertainty can be potentially quite crippling, and it can impact on investment. So I think we have a real responsibility. We have to balance that responsibility, obviously, with making sure that we are true to our mandate, which is to protect competition and to make sure that truly anti-competitive deals don't get through. But as we know from the stats, that's a tiny, tiny minority. So we need to root those out, filter out the rest as quickly as we can.
And I mean, we know about the sort of the phase 2 reforms that have been implemented, but I think there will be a feeling that even sort of a phase 1 process in the UK is pretty lengthy compared to comparable regimes. So do you think that we'll expect to see some changes in how
I think we need
phase
to look
1
across
plays out?
the whole experience end to end. I mean, again, there are some differences between the regimes because, of course, the fact that we have a voluntary regime filters out by default a lot of the no-issue mergers. So, of course, that means that there's a greater concentration of deals that we look at where there is at least the potential for a competition issue. So, I think it is important to have that balance in mind. But within that, again, and it is a two-way street because I think the more that we can have that direct and constructive engagement early on, the quicker that enables us to get through the process. But I think to build that trust and confidence, to move away from what I think is sometimes a perception of a sort of default adversarial position, the sense perhaps that we're sort of looking for a problem. Again, I don't think that's the case. I know that's not the case, but I can understand why there may be a perception that people feel that businesses can feel a little bit on the back foot and on the defensive. And I think we need to try to shift that perception so that actually we can create that environment to really work in a really constructive way to get to the bottom of the issues that we're looking at as quickly as possible.
That's encouraging to hear. I think there will be lots of other questions on these particular issues, so I actually just wanted to pivot away from that and just ask about engagement with the EU, because UK is close to finalising its competition cooperation agreement with the EU and the member states. So how are you seeing, are we going to see these policy changes sort of be reflected in how you engage with the EU going forward, or how do you see that engagement working?
Look, I think from a business perspective, it's really important for businesses to understand that we have an appropriately joined up approach. Of course, we have to do our own analysis and we have to look at the issues for the UK, and sometimes they may be broadly the same because it's a global market, or in other cases there may be particular features of the UK which require a slightly different approach. What I think businesses look for is confidence that we are looking at the totality in the sense that, again, I remember this from my years in private practice, but the last thing you want is a sense of a really sort of disparate set of different jurisdictions doing their own thing in a really uncoordinated way, and the timing's all over the place, and you don't know whether issue here is going to drive this outcome and over there. So I think we have managed to maintain, through very strong working relationships that we have with the European Commission, as we have with many other agencies, the ability to sort of align on timing as much as we can to ensure that we're well sighted on processes, and of course in appropriate cases where we have the ability to share information on a particular deal to enable us to do that. And I think that is incredibly helpful, I hope, for businesses who can have confidence in that. Of course, ultimately, we still have to look at the question that we have to answer for the UK. But I hope the business already feels, but certainly with the cooperation agreement, I think reinforces a confidence that we recognise that ultimately, when we're looking at merger control, it's very often part of a broader landscape of review.
Thank you. I'm going to open questions to the floor. Just a couple of quick instructions. So if you can raise your hand but stay seated, there is a roving mic that will come to you. I saw a hand tentatively go up at the back there.
Hi, Matt Sinclair, Computer and Communications Industry Association. I was curious, I talked to people with, I feel like, pretty diverse views on the economics of digital markets, who seem to have a kind of shared concern around the clarity on milestones, on evidentiary expectations, etc., in the DMCC guidance. And I was wondering if we should expect more, or if it was going to be a bit more of a kind of suck it and see, and we'll kind of learn from the initial cases about what CMA is looking for from participants in that process.
Yeah, so obviously we have consulted on our draft guidance, and we had really, really helpful and extensive feedback actually through that consultation, both through sort of written responses and a lot of stakeholder engagement that we were able to carry out. And that's given us some very helpful feedback in terms of bringing in some greater clarity, as you say, particularly around some of the procedural steps and also around the sort of analytical approach. Again, it's important to have a degree of balance here because obviously it's a new regime, and that regime will naturally evolve, and we will learn and parties will learn as we go. But I think what you will see with the final guidance is a degree more detail in some of those areas. It's important to emphasise, I mean, that's obviously now sitting with government to approve. But as we go through into the regime, I mentioned it in the speech, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but this focus on a participative approach is very, very different. I think it will look and feel quite different. And that is about engagement with a whole range of different stakeholders. It's engagement with the prospective designated firms, but it's equally importantly engagement with the multitude of different businesses and interest groups who may have concerns or interests in the outcomes of the work that we're doing. And so I think it will have a built-in degree of interaction and transparency that is, I would say, almost more important, but certainly as important as what you get in the guidance.
There's a question on this side of the room.
Thank you. I'm John Alty. I'm a member of the Competition Appeal Tribunal. I wanted to ask about economic growth, which you talked about. You talked about remedies quite a lot, but in the Draghi report on EU competitiveness, he seemed to go wider than that. And I wondered whether you thought that there was any need or value in looking at the economic analysis in the first place, or the way you saw competition before you reach a conclusion which might lead to remedies. Thank you.
So let me sort of unpack that a little bit. Look, I think that the starting point here is that competition is absolutely a key driver of growth. And it's really important that, when we are doing our work, whether that is in a merger context, looking at whether a merger gives rise to a substantial lessening of competition, or in a market investigation, looking at whether there's an adverse effect on competition, we're not just doing a sort of theoretical, analytical exercise about the impact on competition. We're doing that because competition delivers really important positive benefits, and that may be in terms of reduced price, greater innovation, more choice. But the fundamental contribution of competition to growth is equally important there. And that's something I really want people to take away from this discussion, because it's central to so much of the work that we do, whether it's hardcore competition enforcement, which is about making sure that companies are not fixing prices or reaching anti-competitive agreements that may suppress that dynamic rivalry that is so critical to provide that sort of spur to innovation, or whether it's looking at markets where there are sort of inherent barriers, whether that's through competitive practices or whether it's through poorly designed regulation is often the case. So the starting point for us is that competition is a means to an end. Competition is a route through which we deliver many benefits for the UK economy. Now, coming back to your question on remedies, how can remedies then be used to support that? And what I am setting out in the speech is really to emphasise that where it is possible to use remedies effectively, and we know that legally in the statute, the remedies have to be effective to address the competition concern, but where it is possible to use remedies effectively to ensure that competition is preserved in a way that can deliver those benefits, including the benefits from growth, the benefits from investment in network infrastructure or in technology, then we should absolutely be doing that. That doesn't mean we should lower the bar to allow any anti-competitive merger to get through because there's a sort of half-baked remedy in place. But we absolutely should be straining every sinew to test whether there is an effective remedy that can deliver those benefits. That's in the statute, that's part of our job, and that is what I really want to emphasise that we are very focused on doing.
Lady at the back.
Hi, Charlie Connor from the Capital Forum. Just another question on the practicalities of this economic growth priority. Does it mean that, for example, in every CMA merger decision, we'll see a paragraph or a section on how a deal contributes to economic growth? Is it something that, it sounded like from your speech, something that the parties can bring forward as an efficiency, but will the CMA be doing sort of its own economic empirical analysis in every case to assess economic growth, or is it more of a sort of cerebral concept that you'll bear in mind?
So I'm not sure it's either of those. It's definitely not just a cerebral concept, but it's about the reality, as I said, of what competition delivers. So I don't think we're not sort of substituting into the statute a legal test that is now asking a question about growth instead of a question about competition, because our responsibility is to apply the law, and the law asks us to review whether or not there's a substantial lessening of competition. So we have to keep focused on our job, which is to look at competition. But where competition is driving growth, where a merger can support that through investment, for example, and that is well evidenced, then that would be a factor that we would take into account. But we have to look at that through the competition lens, because that is our job to do. If there are broader policy considerations at play, now that sort of sits outside that competition lens. But as I said in the speech, it is perfectly possible to look at competition alongside wider policy objectives. I think the other thing I would emphasise is that the work that we do, there are many different elements to it. So I've talked about our competition enforcement work. Juliet's here, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later as well. Our markets work is really important, but we also have a very important advocacy role in the statute. We have a responsibility to provide advice to government. So we'll be publishing today our response to the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, and in that response you will see how we set out very clearly the role that we see for the CMA in contributing and supporting the growth mission, both through advice to government in the design of its industrial strategy, in how it might go about selecting some of the subsectors within the 8 key sectors that the government has identified for growth, but also in the work that we can do directly. And one of the things that we will be absolutely focusing on, particularly as we're thinking about some of our more discretionary work, some of the areas that we might select for markets work in the next year, have a real focus on, are there markets where we identify opportunities to provide our analysis and expertise to help support and open up markets for greater growth and greater innovation. In terms of how we'll report on that, we're very keen actually to get feedback and input from stakeholders on the best way to capture that. What I think we absolutely should be doing every year in our annual report is giving a very clear account of how we as the CMA have contributed to growth.
I think I saw Stavrula's hand go up in the back.
Priority. Hi, I'm Stavrula Verena from Clipper Chance. So since, turning to AI for a second, so since the CMA published its update report on AI foundation models, the CMA has been busy reviewing a few investments into AI foundation model startups. In your engagement with the startup community, how have these reviews been received, and have you heard concern that it makes it, at least in perception, a little bit more difficult to get investment? And what is the message that you would like startups to take from these reviews? What have the CMA's learnings been from these reviews?
Yeah, no, great question. Again, a couple of bits of an answer, if that's okay. So I think first point to mention is that alongside those merger reviews, a really important piece of work that we did was the wider report that we published, where we set out the 6 principles that we see as sort of guiding open and effective competition in these markets. And those principles around access to capital, around access to key inputs, diversity of models, choice for businesses, consumers, making sure there's no sort of anti-competitive tie-ins, lock-ins, transparency, accountancy through the supply chain. When we speak to stakeholders, startups, investors, uniformly welcome those principles as being absolutely the right way to look at how to open up and protect competition and opportunities. And we know from all the conversations that we have had that there are many businesses and investors here in the UK who are looking for an opportunity that may not be bringing along the next largest frontier model, but they may well be developing some smaller models, or they may well be looking at ways to deploy those models in different sectors across the economy, where those foundational principles are absolutely key to maximising their opportunity to do that. So I think that's a really important point to make at the outset. In terms of the merger reviews, what we were looking at there was really a handful of deals where we could see partnerships or investments between some of the very major players who we know already have substantial positions of market power in some of the established digital markets, and whether those partnerships were A, fell within merger control, and B, whether they raised competition concerns. And that is a question that has raised quite a lot of uncertainty across the globe. We've seen reviews in different shapes and forms in the US and in the EU and other jurisdictions as well. So what we chose to do with that handful of deals that we looked at was really move quite fast, I think, to provide greater clarity. And what we've done so far with the decisions that we've published on Mistral, on Inflection, and on the 2 Anthropic arrangements is actually provide greater clarity in 3 out of the 4 cases that they don't fall within merger control, which I think is important actually, because I think that should be giving those startups and smaller companies and investors confidence that there is more clarity about where they fall within or without, how we look at the question of control, for example. And then in the case of Inflection, obviously, we found that it did constitute a merger, but it didn't raise competition concerns. So again, providing more clarity about the way we might look at competition concerns in that market. So that was very much our objective. It has helped us get a greater understanding of those boundaries and those bright lines, and I hope that has provided more clarity to business as well. As we go forward, of course, with the new digital markets regime, that gives us a sort of different vehicle for looking at some of these arrangements as well.
I was hoping to squeeze another question, but we are at time. Thank you very much, Sarah, and the audience for such an engaged and open discussion this morning. I think we're all looking ahead to see how this is all implemented going forward. We do need to close, unfortunately, but we will hand over to the next session on developments in antitrust investigations and enforcement. So please give Sarah a round of applause. Thank you very much.